In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create these 3 procedural Christmas ornament materials. And after we create the procedural materials, I'll show you how to join the materials together into these custom node groups. So the first material that we're going to be creating is this dotted ornament. So we have the overall scale of the material, and then we also have the different colors. So colors 1 and 2, and then color 2 here, this will change the color of the dots. And then we also have the metallic value if you want to make it more metallic or less metallic. We also have the size of the dots, so I can make that bigger or smaller. And then I have this dots randomized value. Then I have the roughness of the material, and then also the bump strength. And then the second material that I'm going to be creating is this striped ornament. So I have the scale of the material, and then we also have the metallic, and then we also have the different colors of the stripes, so colors 1, 2, and 3. Then we have the rotation, so if you want to rotate the stripes direction, you can do that. And then we have this offset here if you want to just change the offset of the stripes. Then we have this cool distortion value, so you can kind of distort this a little bit, and that's kind of a cool looking Christmas ornament. And then we have the roughness and also the bump strength. And then the last one here is this cool one. This is the frosted icy ornament. So for this one, we have the color of the ornament, and then we also have the scale, and then also the visibility. So you can change the visibility of the frosted icy ornament texture. And then we also have the roughness. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase these procedural materials, then you can purchase the project files on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. I'll have the links in the description. And if you're needing a bunch of different Christmas ornament models for your holiday scenes, then definitely check out my Christmas Ornaments Asset Pack. And my Christmas Ornaments Asset Pack has 160 Christmas ornament 3D models, and they're all pre-set up in Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails. So once you set up the models in the asset browser, you can just drag and drop the models into your projects and add Christmas ornaments to your holiday scene. So you can check out that product with the link in the description. And if you'd like to watch more Christmas and holiday Blender tutorials, then definitely check out my Christmas and holiday Blender tutorial playlist with the link in the description. Alright, so I'll now show you the 3D setup if you want to set up the Blender file the same way that I have. So I press Shift A, I went here to Mesh, and I added a UV sphere. And then the default objects in Blender are quite large when modeling to the real life scale in Blender. So I'm going to scale this object down, and I'll type in 0.07 and then hit enter. And then I can use the object context menu to shade the object smooth. And I also can press Ctrl A and just apply the scale. So this is the object's new default size. And then I'm also going to press Ctrl 1, and Ctrl 1 is going to add a subdivision surface with 1 level here on the modifier properties, and I'm going to turn the render and viewport both to 1. So I'll now hit the tab key to go into the object, and I want to model the little top piece. So I'll click here to go to the vertex select. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and select that loop of vertices there, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and I can bring it up on the Z axis, and then I'll scale it up a little bit. And I'm going to press the F key to fill a face there, and then I can hit E to extrude and bring it down on the Z axis, bring it down there, and then I can hit X to delete, and I'll delete the faces because we don't need that extra face down there. And then I'll press Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and I can left click, drag up, place it there. And then if I click here to go to the face select, I'll select this face, and I'll hit the I key to insert that face and place it there. And then if I go back to object mode, I will use the object context menu to shade the object smooth. So I'll now go back into edit mode, and I want to add the little hook piece. So I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to add a cube. And I'll scale the cube way down so it is much smaller, and bring it up on the Z axis and make it really small. Bring it down a little bit. And then I'm going to scale it up on the X axis, so scale that up longer, maybe scale it down a bit and bring it down on the Z axis. And then I want to add some loop cuts, so I'll press Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and I can scroll my mouse wheel until there are 2, and then I can left click and right click so they stay in the center. And then I can scale them up on the X axis and bring that out just like that. So I can now click here to go to the face select, and I'm going to select this face and hold down the Shift key and select this face, and I'll hit E to extrude, and I'll bring it down on the Z axis, place it there, and then I can hit the X key, and let's just delete those faces because we don't need those extra faces in there. And then I want to add some loop cuts to sharpen the object, so I'll press Ctrl R to add a loop cut. I'll drag over and click there, Ctrl R to add another loop cut, place it there, Ctrl R to add another loop cut, and Ctrl R to add another loop cut. And then I can go back to object mode, and using the object context menu, I'll shade it smooth. and that is going to be our Christmas ornament. So I can now select the ornament in object mode, I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and I can bring it over on the X-axis, place it there, and then I can press Shift D to duplicate, bring it over on the X-axis, place that there. So now we have 3 ornaments. Then I just added a camera, and I just pointed the camera at the Christmas ornaments. Now for the lighting, if you go over here to the world properties, I added in this Christmas Photo Studio 02 HDRI. So this is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com. I'll have a link in the description if you'd like to download it. And I downloaded the 1K version and the HDR version from Polyhaven. So once you download the HDRI, you can go here to the world properties. You can click here on the yellow dot next to color, and you can choose environment texture, and then just click on the open button and open up the downloaded HDRI. And then I'm going to hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view. Now, if you want to make the background transparent so that you can't see the HDRI in the background, then you can go here to the render properties and you can open up the film tab right here and then just checkmark the transparent button so you can't see it in the background. And then also, if you go down here to the very bottom and open up the color management, I'm going to be using the view transform of Filmic, and I'll set the look to very high contrast to pop out the colors and make everything more saturated. So I've clicked over here to go to the shading workspace. So in the shading workspace, I have the 3D viewport right over here, and I'm in the rendered mode, and then I have the shader editor right over here. So I'm just going to select the first object. Let's click on new to add a new material, and I'm actually going to rename this to gold top because we're going to be creating the gold top first. So this material is going to be pretty simple. So I'm going to turn the metallic value all the way up to 1, and then the roughness, I'll turn that down to like a 0.2. And then here on the base color, I'll make that kind of a gold color. And if you want to use the same exact gold color that I'm using, then you can go to the hex value and you can punch in FF A132. And then I'm going to click and drag right here on the material, and I'm going to drop the gold material onto these other objects as well. Alright, so now we can create the procedural materials. And I will be using the Node Wrangler add-on in this tutorial to preview the different nodes. So to enable the Node Wrangler, you can click on Edit, and you can go to the Preferences, and then over there on the Add-ons tab, just search for Node Wrangler, and you can enable the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. Alright, so let's click over here on the material properties, and I want to add a new material in the material slot. So I'm going to click on the plus here to add a new material. Let's click on new, and I'm going to rename this material to dotted ornament. So I'll now go into edit mode, and I'm going to hover my mouse over the ornament and press the L key to select the linked vertices. And then if you click on the dotted ornament, you can just click on assign. So now the dotted ornament material is just on the sphere, and then the gold is on the top part. Alright, so now we can create the procedural material. So to start off, I'll press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture. Let's drop the Voronoi texture here, and then if you hold down the Control and Shift key and select the different nodes, that is using the feature of the Node Wrangler, and it's going to preview the node on the object. And then I can also press Control T with the Voronoi texture selected, and that is going to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. Now I want to use the object coordinates because the object coordinates will place the texture on the object more evenly. So let's take the object and I can put that into the vector of the mapping. So now we can change some of the Voronoi texture settings. So for the scale here, I'm going to turn this up to 115, but then I'll leave the other settings how they are. Now I want to make the Voronoi texture more contrasty, so I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'll search for a color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp after the Voronoi texture. So I can now drag these two tabs together, and I'm actually going to switch the values. So I'm going to drag the white tab over here and the black tab over here, and so now you can see we have all those nice little dots. So I now want to create the colors, so I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the mix color, and let's put the mix color after the color ramp. I can drag these nodes out of the way, and let's put the color ramp color into the factor. So by putting it into the factor, this color ramp, the black and white values, are going to determine what parts are going to be color A and what parts are going to be color B. So we can now make the different colors for A and B. So for color B, I'm just going to make this fully white, but then here on color A, I'm going to make this a red color, and it's not going to be fully bright, but pretty bright. And if you want to use the exact same hex value that I'm using for this red color, you can go to the hex and you can punch in BF0700. Now I want to be able to control the size of the dots. So to do that, I'll press Shift A, I'll go to the search, and I'll search for the hue saturation value, and we'll put the hue saturation value after the Voronoi texture. So this value here is going to make the colors lighter or darker. And if I Control Shift and select the hue saturation value, if I turn this up, you can now see it's making it lighter or darker. But if you zoom in here to the Voronoi, you can see that by changing the value, it is actually making the size bigger or smaller of the dots. So if I Control Shift and select the mix here, now if I change the value, that is actually going to change the size of the dots. So we'll be using that later in the custom node group. So I can now take this mix result and I want to put that into the base color of the principled shader, and I can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. All right, let's zoom out there. And then I want to make this metallic, so we can just turn the metallic value all the way up to 1. So now I want to add a little variation in the roughness. So what I'm going to do is press Shift A, and I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and let's drop the color ramp right down here. Now, because I want a bit of variation in the roughness, I'm going to use this color ramp here, and this color ramp is going to be the black and white texture of the dots. So let's just Control Shift and select the principled shader again. So I'll take the color and I'll put that into the roughness. Now right now you can see it's very contrasty, so the red is super shiny and the white is super rough. So to make that more subtle, I'm going to take this new color ramp that we've added, and I'm going to put this in between the color ramp and the roughness. So I can now change these two colors. So if I click on the black tab and turn it up, you can see that it's going to be more rough. So if it is a lighter color, it's going to be more rough. And then this value here, if I click on this color and turn it down, you can see it's going to be more shiny. So I'm going to drag both of these values together just to make sure it's very contrasty. And then I can just play around with the white tab and the black tab. So I think I want to turn this up a little bit so that the white dots are a bit more rough. And then this here, this I'm going to make a little bit darker so that it's a little bit more shiny. And that is pretty much it. Now I do also want to be able to control the roughness in the node group, so I can click on the hue saturation value and press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's put it here after the color ramp. So because the lighter and darker values are controlling the roughness, I can just change this value around, and that's going to change the white and dark values, so that'll control the roughness in the custom node group. And then there is just one more thing that I want to do to this material, and that is that I want to add a subtle little bump here where the white dots are. So I'm going to click on this color ramp here, and let's put that into the normal to give it some bump. Now we need to convert this to bump data because you can see it's really black here, so there's some weird shading issues. So I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the bump node, and we'll put the bump node in between the color ramp and the normal. And then to actually convert the black and white data into normal data, we want to put the color ramp into the height value. So now if you zoom in here, you can see where those white parts are. It kind of has this little bumpy edge. So I can now turn the strength up and down to change the size of that. And I'm going to turn the strength just like a 0.1. So now if you zoom in there, you can see there's just a little bit of bump around those dots. All right, and that is it for the procedural material. So I'm now going to show you how to join the material together into a custom node group. So I'm going to click and drag to box select all the nodes except the material output, and then I will press Ctrl G to join it together into a node group. Now if you press the tab key with the node group selected, that is going to go in and out of the node group. So let's drag the node group over here, and I can make it bigger, and then I want to copy the same material name and paste the material name here in the node group so that it's called dotted ornament. So let's go back into the node group with the tab key, and I'll press the N key to open the side panel. And if you click here on group, there is the interface, and we can change all the customizable values right here. So on the BSDF, I'm just going to rename this to shader because I like that better. So we now have this group input node, and we can plug up all the values up to the group input, and then we'll be able to control those values outside of the node group. So I first want to be able to change the overall scale of the material. So let's take the mapping scale, and I can put that into the group input. Now, if you click on the scale here, you can see it has 3 different values, but I just want to make this one value to control the overall scale. So let's click on the type here, and I'm going to change it to float instead so that it is one single value. Now the default value we need to turn back to 1, and you can see the dots are still gone. That's because I need to go outside of the node group, and here on the scale I need to turn that to 1. So let's go back into the node group. And the next values that I want to control are the colors. So let's drag the group input up here, and we can take color A and color B, and we can put those into the extra sockets there. And then if we double click on this to rename it, I'm going to rename it to color 1 and then also color 2. Alright, and then I also want to be able to control the metallic value, so let's plug the metallic into the extra socket there. And then I also want to be able to control the dot size, so this value here, this is going to control the size of the dots, so I'll put the value into the extra socket there, and then I can double click on this to rename it, and I'm going to rename it to dots size. And then I also want to be able to control the dots random, so you can see there's this random value on the Voronoi texture, so let's put this into the extra socket there, and then if I click on this to rename it, I'm going to rename it to dots random. And then I want to be able to control the roughness of the material. So this hue saturation value is making it lighter or darker, so that is controlling the roughness. So we'll put the value into the extra socket here. I can double click on this to rename it, and I'm going to rename it to roughness. And then finally, I want to be able to control the bump strength. So let's drag the group input down here, and I can take the strength and put that into the extra socket. And then I can just rename this to bump strength. Alright, so let's drag the group input back here, and I will press the tab key to go outside of the node group, and I'll press the N key to close the side panel, and we can now review that material. So we have the overall scale, and then we also have the different colors, so the main color, and then also the color of the dots. And then you can make it more or less metallic, and you can also change the size of the dots and the dots randomness. And then we have the roughness of the material, and then also the bump strength. Alright, so that is the first ornament. So I'm just going to hide this by hitting the H key just to hide that ornament. And I'm going to click here on the next ornament. And let's open up this side panel here. And I want to add a new material here. So let's click on the plus here to add a new material to the material slot. And I'll click on new to add a new material. And I'll double click on this to rename it. And I'm going to rename it to striped ornament. And then if I hit the tab key to go into the node group, I need to press the L key with my mouse hovered over the main object, and then with the striped ornament selected, I will click on the assign button. Alright, so hit the tab key to go back into the node group, and we can now create this procedural material as well. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for a wave texture. Let's drop this here, and I can Control Shift and select the wave texture to preview it. And then with the wave texture selected, I'll press Control T to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes, and I want to use the object coordinates, so let's plug the object into the vector. And then I want to change some of the settings of the wave texture, so let's take the X here, and I'm going to turn it to Z instead, so that the waves are going back and forth, so they are horizontal instead of vertical. And then I can change some more of the settings, so I'm going to turn the scale to 8, but then all the other settings I'll leave how they are. But you can change the scale value depending on how many stripes you want. And then one more setting that I do want to change, I want to take the sign right here, and I want to change it to triangle instead. So I now want to create two different masks, and those two different masks are going to be the different colors for the stripes. And then we'll use those masks in mix color nodes to make the different colors. So I'll press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to add a color ramp, and I'll drop the color ramp here. Let's drag these nodes back. And then I also want to press Control Shift D to duplicate that color ramp, but keep the wires plugged up. So now we can make the two different masks. So I'm going to Control Shift and select this color ramp right here. And for this one, I'm going to drag the white tab way over here, and I'll drag the black tab over here. And I'm going to drag them very close to each other so that they are very contrasty. And that's going to be it for the first mask. So I'll now Control Shift and select this color ramp here. And for the second one, I want to drag the black tab way over, kind of to about here. And then the white one, I'm going to drag this over to about there. So now if I Control Shift and select these, you can see we have two different masks for where those stripes are going to be. So I'm now going to create some mix nodes. So I'll press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the mix color node, and we'll drop this after the color ramp. And then I want to press Shift D to duplicate this, drop this up here, and I want to take this color ramp, and I'll put the color into the factor. And for this one here, I also want to put the color into the factor. So now we are going to make the different colors. So for this bottom mix right here, let's take color A, and I'm going to make this a pretty bright color and then a red color. And the red color that I'll be using, if you want to use the same exact color, you can go to the hex and you can punch in FF1000. And then for color B, I'm just going to make this fully white. All right, so those are the white colors and the red colors. So I now want to mix this into the other mix, and then we'll be creating the green color. So let's take the mix result here, and I can put that into color A, and then I can Control Shift and select this mix color to preview it. So now color B, that can be the other color. So color B is going to be a nice bright green color. And the hex value that I'll be using for color B is going to be a hex value of 01FF 0, 0. So we can now take the mix result and I can put that into the base color, and I can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. And then I want to make this metallic as well, so we'll turn the metallic value all the way up to 1. And then I also want to have there be little bumps on the edges of those stripes. So let's take the mix result here and I can put that into the normal. Now there's some weird shading issues, and that is because we need to convert the color data into normal data. So I'll press Shift A and we're going to search for the bump node, and we'll put the bump node after the mix here. And I want the mix result to be going into the height value, and that way it's going to convert it to bump data. So I can now change the strength there, and you can see there's going to be that little bump on the edges. But I'm going to turn the strength way down to like a 0.25, so it is pretty subtle. And then also, if you want to be able to see that bump a little bit better, you can drag these two values a little bit farther away from each other. And then this color ramp here, drag the two values away from each other, and that's going to add a little bit of a blending there. And so now you can see that bump is a little bit stronger. And then also, let's turn the roughness down a little bit, and you can see it a bit better. Now regarding the roughness, I do want there to be a little bit of variation in the roughness to just make it look a bit more realistic. So I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for the noise texture, and let's put that underneath the wave texture. And then I want to use the same object coordinates, so we'll take the mapping, and we can put that into the vector of the noise texture. And then I can Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it, and let's change a few of the settings. So I'll turn the scale way up to like a 30, and the detail I'll turn all the way up to the max of 15. So I now want to put the noise texture factor into the roughness so that some parts are more rough and other parts are more shiny. So we'll take the factor value and we're going to drag this into the roughness, and I can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. Now I want to be able to make it more shiny, so let's click on one of these color ramps, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and I can drop it here after the noise texture. And then if you select the color ramp, you can just hit the backspace to reset the color ramp. So now I can change the colors of the black and white tabs, and if I turn the values up, it's going to be more rough. But if I take this white value and turn it down, it's going to be more shiny. So I'm going to turn this value way down, so it's just kind of like a light gray. And then this black value here, I'm going to turn this up a little bit, so it is a bit of a lighter gray. So just something like that. So now you can see there's just kind of a little bit of variation. You can see there's just a bit of noise there in the roughness. And I might even turn this scale up a little bit more, so maybe I'll turn that up to like a 40, so there's a bit more of that scale. All right, now later on in the custom node group, I want to be able to control the roughness. So to do that, I can just control the white and dark values. So I'll press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, and I'll search for the hue saturation value, and we can just stick this here between the color ramp and the roughness. Let's just drag that down there and stick the hue saturation right there. So now if I change that value, the value is going to make the colors lighter or darker, and so that'll control the roughness. All right, so that is it for the procedural material. So let's join this together into a custom node group. So I'll click and drag to box select all these nodes, and I'll press Ctrl G to join it together into a node group. I'll hit the tab key to go outside of the node group, and I can drag the node group over here, and let's make it bigger, and we can copy the material name, and we can paste the material name right there, so it is now called Striped Ornament. So let's go back into the node group, and I'll press the N key to open the side panel, and here on the interface, I'm just going to rename this to Shader because I like that better. So now we can add all of the custom values up to this group input. So I first want to be able to control the overall scale. So let's take the scale and put that into the extra socket. And then if you click on the scale, again, I want to make it one single value instead of 3 values. So let's click on the type here and we'll change it to float. And then again, you can see the material has disappeared. That's because we need to turn the default value to 1, and then we need to go outside of the node group with the tab key and turn this scale value to 1. So now that'll control the scale. So we'll go back into the node group. So now I want to control the metallic value, so we'll drag the group input over here, and we can plug the metallic up to the group input there. And then I also want to be able to control the colors, so let's drag the group input back here, and I can drag all of the colors, so A and B and also B here, plug those up to the group input. And then if I double click on this to rename it, I'm going to rename all these to color 1 and color 2 and also color 3. And then I also want to be able to control the rotation of the stripes. So let's drag the group input back here, and this mapping node is plugged up to all the textures. So these rotation values are going to change the rotation of the material. So let's put the rotation into the value right there. And then if we go outside of the node group, you can see there's 3 rotation values. So if you want to rotate the rotation of the stripes you can. So you could have it vertical or have it like sideways, and you can just rotate it around. All right, so let's go back into the node group. Now I also want to be able to control the offset. So this wave texture here, it has this phase offset, and so that'll bring the wave texture up and down. So let's put the phase offset into the extra socket here, and then I can double click on this to rename it, and I'm just going to rename it to offset. And then also I want to take this cool distortion value, and let's put that into the extra socket as well. And then I want to be able to control the roughness of the material. So let's drag the group input right over here. And this hue saturation value is going into the roughness. And so it is controlling the light and dark values. So that'll control the roughness. So let's put the value into the extra socket here. And I can double click on this to rename it. And I'm going to rename it to roughness. And then the last value that I want to control is the bump strength. So we'll put the strength into the extra socket here. And I can double click on this to rename it. And I'll rename it to bump strength. All right, so I'll drag the group input back here. I'll press the N key to close the side panel, and I'll hit the Tab key to go outside of the node group. And we can now review the material. So we have the overall scale, and then we also have the metallic value, and then we also have the customizable colors. Then we have the rotation, if you want to change the rotation of the stripes. We also have this offset value, and this cool distortion value, and then the roughness of the material, and then finally the bump strength. All right, let's press Ctrl S again to save the project. And I'm going to click here on the last ornament. Actually, first, I'm going to select this ornament here, and I'll hit the H key to hide it just to get it out of the way. So I'll now select this ornament here. Let's drag out the side panel. And again, I want to add another material in this material slot. So I'll click on the plus here to add a new material, and I can just click on new. And then if I double click on this, I want to rename this to Frosted Icy Ornament. And then let's go into edit mode, and I'm just going to select one of the pieces here, and then press the L key with my mouse hovered over the main piece to select all the linked vertices, and then select the Frosted Ice Ornament, and then click on the Assign button. So let's hit the Tab key to go back to object mode, and I can drag this over here to make it smaller, and then we can create this procedural material. So for this material, I'll press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture. Let's drop the Voronoi here, and I can Control Shift and select it to preview it. And I'm also going to press Control T with the Voronoi texture selected, and we'll put the object into the vector, so it is using the object coordinates. And then let's change some of the Voronoi texture settings. So I'm going to click on this one here, and I'm going to change it to the Minkowski, if that's how you pronounce it, change it to Minkowski, and then I also want to turn the scale up to 100. And now you can see we have these really cool icy textures there. And then all of these settings, I will leave them how they are. Now I do want to be able to control the size and the sharpness of those icy texture, so I'll press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, and I'll search for the hue saturation value, and we'll put that after the Voronoi, and then we can change this value, and that'll make it brighter or darker. And so we'll be using that later to control how visible it is. I'm going to click on these nodes and drag them over, and what I now want to do is duplicate these two nodes 2 more times. So with the Voronoi and the hue saturation value selected, I'm going to actually bring them up a little bit, and then I'll press Control Shift D. So Control Shift D will duplicate the nodes and keep them plugged up, keep the wires plugged up, and then I'll press Control Shift D, duplicate that again, and bring it down there. So I now want to change the size of these different textures. So on this second one here, this Voronoi, I'm going to turn this one to like a 60, and then on this bottom one right here, I'm going to turn this up to like a 120. So now if I Control Shift and select each Voronoi, you can see that they are different sizes. So I now want to mix them all together. So I'll press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, and I'll search for the mix color node, and I just want to add the dark values, since if I Control Shift and select these, you can see that the little icy texture is dark. So I'm going to click on the mix here, and I'm going to change it to darken instead. So this way it's just going to add the dark values. So let's drag the darken down here, and I'm going to plug both hue saturation values up to these. So this bottom one I'm actually going to put into color 1, and then this one here I'm going to put into the second one, so color B. And then I will Control Shift and select it to preview it, and I'm going to turn the factor all the way up to 1, and that was just adding the dark values. So now you can see we've added both textures. So I'm now going to press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it up here, and I'm going to bring these over, and I'm going to take this darkened result, and I'm going to put that into color A. And then I want to take this hue saturation value and let's put that into color B. And again, this is set to darken, so it's just adding the dark values. So now if I control shift and select this darken, you can see we now have many of those little frosty textures. Now I also want to mix a noise texture into this texture. So I'll press shift A and I'll go to the search and I'll search for a noise texture. Let's drop the noise texture down here. And then I want to take the object coordinates. So I'm going to take the vector and I'm going to drag this down and put that into the noise texture so that it is using the object coordinates. And then I'll control shift and select the noise texture to preview it. And let's change the scale to 1 and I'll turn the detail to the max of 15. And this roughness here I'll turn to like a 0.75. Alright, so I now want to make the noise texture a bit more contrasty, so I'll press Shift A, and I'll search for the color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp here after the noise texture, and then I actually want to flip these values, so I'll drag the white tab over here and the black tab over here, and I'm going to bring the black tab kind of to about there, and I'll leave the white tab here. So now you can actually see that texture better because it is more contrasty. Alright, so I now want to mix this texture into the original color here. So I'm going to select this darken and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it here. Now let's just bring these nodes over. And then this darken result, I want to put that into the factor. So the factor is determining where it's going to be color A and where it's going to be color B. So now I can take this color ramp here. This one is after the noise texture, and let's put that color into color B. So I can now control Shift and select the darken to preview it. So then here for color A, you can see if I turn this up and down, that is basically going to control the color for the frosty ice bits. So I'm going to turn this all the way up to fully white, and I can see those ice bits, those icy bits there are fully white. So let's click and drag to box select these nodes and drag them back a bit. So I now want to put the darken result into the roughness so that some parts are more rough and other parts are more shiny. So we'll put the result here into the roughness, and I can control shift and select the principled shader to preview it. And then to be able to see that a bit better, let's turn the metallic value all the way up to 1. Now that the metallic value is turned up, you can really see the change in the roughness. So you can see most of the ornament is pretty shiny, but then the icy parts are more rough. And then also for the base color here, I want to make this a pink color, so I'm going to make it kind of like a light pink color. But you can really change it to whatever color you want. And if you want to use the same exact pink color that I'm using, you can go to the hex value here, and you can punch in BD81FF. Now I actually want to flip around the colors so that the icy parts are actually more shiny instead of rough. So I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search and I'll search for a color ramp and we'll put this after the darken. And then I actually want to flip these two values, so I'll drag the black tab over here and the white tab over here. But then I don't want it to be quite that rough because that is way too rough. So if I click on the white tab here, I can make it darker, and if it's darker, it's going to be more shiny. So I'm just going to make this kind of like a light gray. So now I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to go back to these hue saturation values. So earlier we added these hue saturation values, and you can see if I change the value, that is going to change how visible the icy textures are, because the value is going to make it lighter or darker. So let's just change some of these values. So this value here, I'm going to turn to like a 0.74, so you can see that a bit better. And then this value here, I'm going to turn this to like a 0.7. And then this one down here, I'm going to turn to like a 0.66. But you can play around with these. So if I turn the value down, it's going to make it darker, so it's going to be more shiny. Or if I turn the value up, it's going to be more rough, and so you can't see it quite as much. So just play around with those values to change the icy ornament texture. Now later on in the custom node group, I do want to be able to control the roughness. So let's kind of compress these nodes. I can bring them back a bit and drag this back a bit. And then right here between the color ramp and the roughness, I'll press Shift A and I'll search for a hue saturation value, and we can put this after the color ramp, and I can drag these over here. So now this value here is going to make the roughness texture brighter or darker, and so that's going to control the roughness. So that is it for the procedural material. So I'm now going to show you how to join it together into a custom node group. So I'll click and drag to box select all the nodes except the material output, and I'll press Ctrl G to join it together into a node group. And if you press the tab key to go outside of the node group, you can drag the node group over here, and I'll make it a bit bigger. So we'll drag this out here, and then if I click on the name and copy it, I can paste the name there. So it's called Frosted Icy Ornament. So let's hit the tab key to go back into the node group, and I'll press the N key to open the side panel. And here on interface, I'm going to rename it to shader because I like that better. So now we can plug up all the custom values to the group input. So I first want to control the color, so I'll drag the group input right over here. We can take the base color and we can plug that into the group input. And if you want to rename this instead of base color, I'll just rename it to color. And then I want to be able to control the overall scale of the material, so we'll drag the group input back here, and we can take the scale value and we'll put that into the extra socket, But then if you click on the scale here, you can see it is 3 values. So to make it 1 value instead, I can change the type to float instead. Now on the default value, let's turn that back to 1, and you can see the texture is still missing. That's because we need to hit the tab key to go out of the node group, and we need to turn the scale back to 1, and now you can see it. So let's hit the tab key to go back into the node group. Now I also want to be able to control the visibility. So if you go over here to this darken, you can see there is this color here, and if I turn this color up and down, that is going to change the entire visibility. So let's take color A here, this white color, and we'll put that into the extra socket. But if I go outside of the node group, you can see it is a color value, but I instead want it to be a value between 1 and 0. So if I hit the tab key to go back into the node group, if I click here on A, I'm going to first rename this to visibility, and then if I click here on the type, instead of it being color, I'm going to change it to float instead. So by changing it to float, the white values are going to be 1, and then the black values are going to be 0. Now here on the default value, I want to turn this to 1, and then outside of the node group, I want to turn this visibility to 1. So again, if it is 1, it's going to be white, but then if it is black, it's going to be 0. So you can see that that is going to change the visibility, and I can even turn it up if I want it to be even stronger. So I can turn it past 1. All right, so let's go back into the node group, and I also want to control the roughness. So right here, this hue saturation value, that is controlling the roughness of the material. So we'll take the value here, and I will plug this into that one here, the extra socket here. And then if I double click on this to rename it, I'm going to rename it to roughness. And then if you want to, you could change the scale of these Voronoi textures. So you could plug those Voronoi textures into the group input if you wanted to kind of control that. And one other thing that I also might do is put this noise texture scale into the extra socket here. So I'll drag this down, and I'll take the noise scale, we'll put that into the extra socket, and if I double click on this to rename it, I'll rename it to noise scale. So then you can also plug the Voronoi scales into the extra sockets if you want to, but I don't really want to do that. I can just use the overall scale of the material. And you could also plug these values up. So if you wanted to, you could plug these values up, but I don't want to make the material too complex. So let's press the N key to close the side panel, and I'll hit the tab key to go outside of the node group, and we can now review the last material. So we first have the color here, so you can make this any color you want for the ornament. Then we also have the overall scale of the entire material. We also have the visibility here, so the visibility of that texture. And then we also have this cool roughness value, and that really makes the material look pretty cool. And then we also have the noise scale if you just want to change that. So you could turn the noise scale really big or really small. Alright, so I'll press Alt-H to unhide all of the other objects, and that is it for the tutorial. So that's going to be it for this tutorial, so I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to purchase the material and support the channel, you can do that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. The links are in the description. And if you're looking for many different Christmas ornament 3D models to use in your Christmas scenes and holiday scenes, then definitely check out my Christmas Ornaments Asset Pack, which comes with 160 Christmas ornaments, and they're all pre-set up for Blender's asset browser, and they all have custom thumbnails, and so you can install the pack in the asset browser, and then you can just drag and drop the models into your holiday scenes to add Christmas ornaments to your renders. And you can also check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack if you're interested in purchasing all of my procedural materials. And if you'd like to watch more Christmas themed tutorials, then you can check out my Christmas Blender tutorial playlist. Again, links in the description. So I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you enjoyed it, and Merry Christmas.